Welcome to Dreamy Tales, a place where gentle, relaxing stories will guide you into a deep sleep. On this channel, we'll be sharing soothing stories to help you unwind and forget the worries of the day. If you enjoy these peaceful moments, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you won't miss any of our bedtime tales. Let's create a space of relaxation together each night. Now, before we dive into tonight's story, let's take a few moments to relax your body and mind. Find a comfortable spot to sit or lie down. Gently close your eyes and take a deep breath. Inhale slowly, feeling the fresh air filling your lungs, and slowly exhale, letting the tension in your body gradually melt away. Repeat this 3 more times. With each breath, feel yourself becoming more relaxed and ready to enter the magical world of stories. Now, loosen your shoulders, gently massage your face, and release any remaining tension. Pay attention to any areas in your body that still feel tight, maybe in your neck, back, or legs, and gently let them relax. Next, we'll do a short guided visualization. Imagine yourself in a beautiful garden under the night sky, with the soft moonlight shining down. You can hear the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the sound of water flowing gently in the distance. Feel the cool breeze brushing against your face. Now that your body and mind are relaxed, let's step into tonight's story. But before we begin, remind yourself that you deserve these moments of relaxation, and let go of all worries as you listen to each word. And now, as you are fully relaxed, let's begin our journey into tonight's tale. Allow my words to guide you into a world of dreams and serenity. Relax and listen slowly. From the balcony of her new apartment, Evelyn could gaze out across the enchanting district of Nihon, a quaint waterfront area of Copenhagen that had long captured the hearts of visitors. The streets here were timeless, and the view from Evelyn's vantage point felt as though the city had been preserved in amber, its beauty untouched by the hands of time. The neighborhood itself, established in the 17th century, was a harmonious blend of history and nature, where cobblestones paved the streets and pastel-colored houses stood shoulder to shoulder, many of them dating back to 1660. This was not just another urban neighborhood. It was a place where history whispered through the wind, inviting one to slow down and take notice of the little things. What struck Evelyn the most was the absence of the usual city noise. No car horns, no rush of traffic, only the occasional sound of seagulls gliding gracefully through the crisp air and the soft murmur of the water as boats bobbed lazily in the harbor. There was a tranquility here that she hadn't known in her previous life. It felt as though time itself had paused, allowing for moments to unfold at their own pace, as if each one was waiting for her to notice its quiet beauty. The colors of the place seemed to change with the light. In the early mornings, the soft hues of the buildings were bathed in the golden glow of dawn. By midday, the sun would reflect off the water, making the pastel houses appear even more vivid and alive. The evenings brought with them a different charm, flickering streetlights casting long shadows along the sidewalks as the cool breeze off the marina carried the scent of salt and earth. Evelyn took it all in, letting the peace of the surroundings settle in her chest. "Well, what do you think?" came a voice from behind, breaking her reverie. She turned to see her new landlord, a kindly middle-aged man who had been warm and welcoming from the moment she had first arrived in Copenhagen. He had an air of quiet pride as he stood beside her, looking out over the district with a satisfaction that only someone who had lived here for generations could have. His fleece jacket was zipped up against the mild November breeze that had begun to stir. Yet he didn't seem bothered by the cool air. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, collected, as though he too had become part of the very rhythm of Nihon. Evelyn smiled, turning back to take one last look at the view before replying, "I love it. It's perfect." The words felt right as they left her lips, and she knew in that moment that this place was meant to be her new home. The landlord's face lit up with a warm grin, and the two of them shook hands, finalizing the deal. He handed her the keys to the apartment, and just like that, Evelyn knew her new life in Copenhagen had officially begun. This place, this little corner of the world, was going to be the perfect spot for her fresh start. As her landlord made his way back inside the building, he paused in the hallway and slipped on his shoes. In Copenhagen, it was customary to remove shoes upon entering a home, a practice Evelyn had encountered before during her travels to Japan, but never in Europe. The sight of him doing so felt oddly reassuring, like the house was already welcoming her into its fold, ready to embrace her new life here. "Do you have any plans for the day?" he asked, looking up from tying his shoes. "I was thinking of going for a walk, exploring a bit," Evelyn replied, pulling her coat tighter around her. Her landlord's eyes twinkled with a sudden idea. "Ah, I know what you should do. Go find out about Hyuga." "Hyuga?" Evelyn echoed, confused. She'd never heard of it before. He smiled knowingly. "Once you figure it out, you'll feel like you belong here, in Nihon. It'll make everything come together." Evelyn nodded, intrigued, and as her landlord stepped back into the building, she felt a sense of curiosity well up inside her. What was Hyuga, and how could it possibly help her feel at home in this new city? Evelyn stood for a moment, looking out over the cobbled streets of Nihon, her mind wandering. The soft hum of the marina below, combined with the lack of traffic, made it feel like the district was caught in a suspended moment in time. The silence was almost meditative. It was the kind of place where every corner held a new story, and Evelyn had only just begun to uncover the layers that made up this part of Copenhagen. She looked down at the map that she had brought along, feeling the thrill of discovery pulse through her veins. The map was glossy and new, and as she traced her finger over it, Evelyn could already imagine the adventures that awaited. Nihon was a small, yet densely packed area filled with history, culture, and surprises at every turn. There was no shortage of places to visit here. From the houses along the harbor, where the famous fairy tale author Hans Christian Andersen had spent much of his life, to the charming Charlottenburg Palace that stood as a testament to the 17th century, the area was a living museum. The bustling Royal Danish Playhouse, housed in an elegant, futuristic structure of glass and steel, stood in stark contrast to the more historic buildings surrounding it. Each location had a unique charm, but it was the small hidden gems that Evelyn longed to discover. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn stepped out of the apartment building and into the narrow, winding streets of Nihon. The November air was crisp, and the smell of the sea hung in the breeze, mingling with the subtle sweetness of autumn. There was a certain quietude about the place that felt unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. She had lived in busy cities before, but this was different. This was a place where every detail seemed to matter. The way the light caught on the water, the sound of footsteps echoing against the cobblestones, even the way the houses seemed to tilt in a quiet surrender to time. Everything here felt intentional, as though the city itself was part of a much larger story. She began walking aimlessly, unsure of where to go first, but that didn't matter. The joy of exploration came from the freedom to wander without a destination. Her feet carried her along the marina, past wooden fishing boats swaying gently in the water, their sails tethered tightly to the docks. It was a scene so picturesque it almost seemed to belong to another era, like a scene plucked from one of Andersen's fairy tales. The air was filled with sounds that spoke to the soul, the soft lapping of water against the quay, the distant call of seagulls circling above, the low hum of the city far off in the background. Yet in this corner of Copenhagen there was no rush, no pressing noise. It was a kind of peace that Evelyn hadn't realized she was craving until now. As she strolled, she passed the house at number 20, where Hans Christian Andersen had lived and written some of his most beloved stories. She couldn't help but smile as she thought of the author, imagining him sitting at a desk, pen in hand, dreaming up tales of magic and wonder. She was in the heart of one of the world's literary capitals, and it made her feel a little closer to the stories she had grown up with. Evelyn's footsteps slowed as she admired the house, a feeling of reverence washing over her. She could almost hear the echoes of Andersen's tales lingering in the air, like whispers of the past. Further down the street, Evelyn found herself drawn to a cluster of modern cafes and restaurants, each offering a different flavor of local life. The Royal Danish Playhouse, a striking building of glass and steel, caught her eye. Its angular design seemed to rise out of the water like something from the future. But it was perfectly at home in the district's historic setting. The contrast between the old and new, the way the city had effortlessly merged the past with the present, fascinated her. She decided to take a seat on one of the benches near the canal, the sun warming her face as she closed her eyes for a moment. The crisp autumn air seemed to cleanse her spirit, and for the first time since arriving in Copenhagen, Evelyn allowed herself to just be. There was no hurry, no agenda, just the beauty of the moment, and the city she was beginning to fall in love with. As she sat there, she imagined herself in a different time, on a quiet porch somewhere in the countryside. She could almost hear the creaking of the wooden floorboards underfoot and the rustling of autumn leaves in the breeze. It felt as though she was part of a larger story, one that stretched back through time, and yet also one that was just beginning. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft melody drifting through the air. Evelyn opened her eyes to see a street performer setting up not far from where she sat. He wore a colorful paisley waistcoat, a pinstriped suit, and a quirky top hat. He was placing his guitar case on the ground, and as he strummed the first few chords, a small crowd gathered around him, drawn in by the sound. The music he played was light and cheerful, and Evelyn couldn't help but smile as she recognized the familiar melody of "Here Comes the Sun" by the Beatles. It was as though the song had been made for this very moment, for the sunny autumn day, for the peaceful canal, and for the perfect sense of calm that had descended over the area. She closed her eyes again, letting the music wash over her, blending with the natural sounds of the city. When the song ended, the performer glanced over at Evelyn and gave her a smile. She smiled back, feeling a sudden urge to ask him more about Copenhagen, about the places he loved, and about the city that had so captured her heart. "Do you have a favorite spot in Copenhagen?" Evelyn asked, curious. The busker paused for a moment, clearly thinking. "The Siren's bookshop," he said with a grin. "It's perfect for first-rate hygge." "Hygge?" Evelyn echoed, her interest piqued. The word had come up before, but she hadn't quite understood its meaning. He nodded, his smile widening. "It means different things to different people. For me, it's spending a rainy afternoon browsing books in a cozy corner, or cooking a meal with friends. But to my friend, it's game night. We all have our own version of hygge. For her, it's the laughter around a board game." Evelyn was intrigued. "So, it's like being cozy." The busker laughed. "Exactly. It's comfort, warmth, relaxation. But it's more than just that. It's a state of being. It's finding joy in the small moments, the simple things." Evelyn was captivated by the concept of hygge. It was one of those words that seemed to encapsulate an entire philosophy, a way of life that prioritized warmth, comfort, and contentment in the simplest moments. As she stood there, surrounded by the cozy atmosphere of Nihon, it seemed to her that the city itself was built around this very idea. Slow mornings with coffee in hand, afternoons spent wandering along the waterfront, and evenings spent in the company of loved ones, curled up in front of a fire. It was a life that encouraged mindfulness and an appreciation for the present moment. "I'll definitely check it out," she said with a smile, her curiosity about the bookshop growing by the second. She was eager to explore more of Copenhagen, and something about the Siren's bookshop called to her, promising the kind of hygge the busker had described. Before he could begin his next song, Evelyn waved him a farewell, thanking him for the recommendation. She set off on foot, following the busker's directions to the Siren's bookshop, eager to see if it truly lived up to the reputation of being the perfect spot for hygge. The walk to the bookshop took her deeper into the heart of Copenhagen, past charming narrow lanes and historic buildings. As she navigated the cobbled streets, she couldn't help but admire how seamlessly the old and the new coexisted in the city. The architectural styles were diverse, with some buildings proudly showcasing centuries of history, while others embraced modern design with bold lines and innovative structures. It was a city that didn't shy away from its past, but neither did it cling to it. Instead, it seemed to honor history while simultaneously embracing the future. She followed the directions on the map, eventually reaching a quaint lane lined with old brick buildings. The street was so narrow that it felt almost like stepping back in time. Each building told a story, with engravings and plaques on the facades marking the years in which they had been constructed. Some houses were from the 17th century, others from the 18th century. But all of them, regardless of age, seemed to exude a quiet dignity, as though they had withstood the test of time and were now content to settle into their place in the world. At the end of the lane, Evelyn spotted the glass door of the Siren's bookshop. It was a modest storefront, with a faded sign hanging above that read, "Copenhagen's oldest book nook," The door creaked open as she pushed it, the faint jingle of a bell announcing her arrival. The moment she stepped inside, she was enveloped by the cozy atmosphere of the shop. The space was small but inviting, with rows of bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of novels, history books, and travel guides. The scent of paper and dust hung in the air, blending with the subtle aroma of fresh coffee from the small cafe tucked in the corner. Evelyn smiled as she wandered further into the shop, feeling as though she had stumbled upon a hidden treasure. The shelves were mismatched, some made of dark wood, others lighter, and there were even a few glass cabinets displaying old, leather-bound volumes. The overall feeling was one of organized chaos. Nothing in the shop was symmetrical, but everything seemed to have its place. It was the kind of bookstore where you could lose yourself for hours, browsing titles and discovering new stories. The bookshop was quiet, save for the occasional soft murmur of customers, each absorbed in their own reading or browsing. In the corner, a small cafe offered simple coffee options, along with 2 types of pastries, cinnamon rolls and cardamom rolls. Evelyn couldn't resist. She ordered a cup of coffee, took a seat in one of the plush, vintage velvet chairs, and settled in to relax. A warm cinnamon roll sat on the table before her, and she took a deep breath, savoring the comforting scent that filled the air. As she flipped through the pages of the book she had picked up, Your Guide to the Hygge Life, Copenhagen's Cafes, Castles, and Cozy Spots, Evelyn couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly it all fit together. The bookshop, the cozy cafe, the quiet atmosphere. This was Hygge at its finest. It wasn't about grand gestures or extravagant experiences. It was about finding joy in the little things, in the moments of quiet contentment that punctuated everyday life. Her eyes lingered on a chapter about Copenhagen's castles, and she found herself drawn to the section on Rosenborg Castle, an opulent Renaissance building that had been home to Danish royalty for centuries. The book's description painted vivid pictures of the castle's grand interiors, from the winter room to the marble room, and the stunning portraits of princes and princesses that adorned the walls. Evelyn's mind began to wander, imagining what it would have been like to live in such a majestic place. What would Hygge have meant to someone in the past? Could it be that the royals of Rosenborg found their own version of Hygge in moments of solitude, curled up with a book by the fire? Or was it something entirely different for them? The thought lingered in her mind as she continued to read, savoring the rich history of the place. She thought about how Hygge seemed to transcend time, offering a sense of peace and well-being no matter who you were or when you lived. Evelyn felt a deep sense of connection to the concept, and in this cozy alcove of the bookshop, surrounded by the warmth of the coffee and the hum of the city outside, she realized that she was already beginning to embrace it fully. When she finished her coffee and cinnamon roll, Evelyn reluctantly closed her book and stood up, feeling a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had found the Hygge she had been searching for, and it was all around her in Copenhagen. In the cozy moments, the simple pleasures, and the unexpected discoveries. She left the bookshop, promising herself she would return often, and made her way back to her apartment, already thinking about how she would spend her next day in the city. As Evelyn walked back towards her apartment, she felt a gentle contentment fill her chest. The day had unfolded beautifully, each step taking her deeper into the heart of Copenhagen. The quiet moments spent in the bookshop, the music from the busker, the peaceful walk through Nihon, all of it seemed to converge into a singular feeling of belonging. It wasn't just the city that made her feel at home. It was the way it invited her to slow down, to savor life in its simplest forms. She passed by the marina again, watching as the last rays of the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The reflection of the water danced on the walls of the buildings, creating a flickering effect that made the whole street seem alive. It was a sight Evelyn knew she would never tire of, a reminder that beauty could be full. When she arrived back at her apartment, the world outside had already begun to settle into the quiet of evening. The soft light from the street lamps reflected off the water in the canal, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows. Evelyn stood for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene before her. She could hear the distant sound of boats in the harbor, their gentle lapping against the quay, a lullaby that soothed her. It was a perfect moment, one that seemed to capture the essence of Higa, the sense that everything was just as it should be. Inside, the apartment was still empty, save for her suitcases and a few boxes from her old home. She had brought a sleeping bag with her, anticipating the lack of furniture, and she unrolled it in the center of the living room. The floor beneath her was cool, but she didn't mind. The apartment had a raw, unfinished feel to it, but that only added to its charm. As she lay down on the sleeping bag, the soft reflection of the canal's water danced across the ceiling, making it feel as though she were floating in a dream. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, it felt as though she were back in one of those quiet moments from earlier in the day, sitting on a porch somewhere, with the sounds of nature around her and the warmth of the sun on her skin. But this time, there was no porch, no autumn leaves rustling at her feet. Instead, there was the soft murmur of the canal, the gentle glow of the streetlights outside, and the comforting knowledge that she had found her place in Copenhagen. In the stillness of the night, Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She thought about the day, about the walk she had taken, the people she had met, and the new experiences that had enriched her understanding of her new home. She thought about the word Higa, how it had transformed from something foreign into something that she was beginning to embrace fully. It wasn't just about cozy evenings by the fire or warm drinks on a rainy day. It was about finding beauty in the ordinary, about embracing the quiet moments and letting them fill you with a sense of contentment. As Evelyn lay there, the northern lights suddenly began to appear outside her window, dancing across the sky in a mesmerizing display of green and gold. She had always dreamed of seeing the aurora borealis, and now, in the comfort of her new home, she was witnessing it firsthand. The lights seemed to ripple through the sky, casting a soft glow over the city and making everything feel even more magical. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt as though the entire universe was conspiring to welcome her into this new chapter of her life. She smiled softly to herself, feeling incredibly fortunate. The city, the people, the experiences, they had all come together to create something beautiful. And she knew, deep in her heart, that Copenhagen was where she was meant to be. As the northern lights faded into the night sky, Evelyn closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, her mind filled with thoughts of the day's adventures and the promise of many more to come. In this city of endless possibility, she felt at peace, knowing that she had found her place in the world. Tomorrow there would be more to explore, more to discover, and more moments of Haiga waiting for her to embrace. But for now, she was content. Everything was all right, just as it was.